This is Limelight America. Here's your host, Michael Drew Shaw.
Thank you, Lynette, and welcome to Limelight America, where we present one-on-one personal conversations with interesting people from all walks of life. These up-close encounters with people of the fascinating and inspiring kind include business, entertainment, sports, and artistic entrepreneurs, scholars, role models, and philanthropists who impact the quality of life for us all.
I'm Jonathan Winters, and I want to say, okay, are you ready? You have a level here and you're all set.
Limelight America with Michael Drew Shaw.
And speaking of Jonathan Winters, the real Jonathan Winters was born in Dayton on November 11th, 1925. After attending public school in Springfield, Ohio, he joined the Marine Corps at the age of 17. He served 2.5 years in the South Pacific, then returned to Ohio and attended Kenyon College. His interest in art led him to Dayton Art Institute, where he studied for over 2 years, then met the girl he would eventually marry, Eileen. Eileen encouraged Jonathan to enter a local talent contest in Dayton, Ohio, which he did. He won a wristwatch, but the performance led him to a job as an early morning disc jockey on radio station WING in Dayton. That was in 1946. That job led him to WBNS Television in Columbus, where he worked for 3 years. In 1953, Jonathan Winters headed for New York for the big time with $56 in his pocket. Well, there's no way to know exactly how much he had in his pocket, but it wasn't very much. As a performer at Manhattan's Blue Angel nightclub, his reputation as a comic began to grow. Gary Moore, who was substituting for Arthur Godfrey on the TV show Talent Scouts, presented Jonathan on the show. Then came the Jack Paar Show, the Steve Allen Show, and the Tonight Show, where Jonathan Winters was able to demonstrate his comic genius, and he became a top name in American comedy. And that was the NBC nightly news theme. If you notice a similarity between that and music from Close Encounters of the Third Kind, E.T., and Star Wars, well, there's a reason. All were composed by John Williams.
If you're trying to attract customers beyond a 10-minute drive of your business, stop. It's a waste of time, money, and the chance for much bigger profits. That is the eye-opening assertion of Tom Feltenstein, the modern-day father of strategic neighborhood marketing, in The 10-Minute Marketer's Secret Formula, a shortcut to extraordinary profits using neighborhood marketing. This basic concept is as old as the general store, when merchants knew every customer by name, and the rules are the same whether you're a multi-billion-dollar corporation or a corner grocery store.
British Rail, the company that operates most of Britain's rail service, discovered that its ridership had gone into a steep decline. Like many large companies with too much money and not enough creative thinking, British Rail executives turned to their marketing department for a quick and easy solution. The answer? We need a new ad agency, a new ad campaign. They decided they needed a marketing blitz that would lure their customers back to the ticket windows. In the process of shopping for a new agency, the British Rail executives trooped off to the offices of a prominent London ad agency to discuss their needs. As they entered, they were met by a very rude receptionist who told them to sit and wait. So they waited, and then they waited some more. After an insulting length of time, an unkempt staff member of the agency led them to a disheveled conference room featuring a table covered with partially read newspapers, stained coffee cups, and plates of stale, half-eaten food. Again, the executives were left to wait. Finally, a few of the agency people, carelessly dressed and ill-groomed, began drifting in and out of the room, ignoring the British Rail executives. When the understandably annoyed executives asked what was going on, they got a curt brush-off and a shrug of the shoulders. The agency people acted as if they didn't care. Finally, the British Rail people had had enough. The head of the delegation vented his outrage, whereupon one of the ad agency executives smiled, approached him, and said, "Gentlemen, your treatment here at this agency is not typical of the way we treat our customers. In fact, we've gone out of our way to stage this meeting for you. We behave this way to demonstrate what it's like to be a customer of British Rail. The real problem at British Rail isn't in your advertising, it's your people, your customer service. We suggest that you let us help you fix your employees' attitude problem first before we attempt to fix your advertising." The British Rail executives were shocked at first, but the agency got the account. It stood out. It proved it was remarkable. The ad people had the courage to point out to British Rail that the answer to their problem was right inside the four walls of their operation. And so is yours. Neighborhood marketing is an old concept, but it's as relevant and fresh as any fancy mass media campaign. It's about targeting your marketing efforts on specific neighborhoods, making sure your message is delivered only to the people most likely to be your customers, those within 10 miles or 10 minutes of your front door. Neighborhood marketing is a business philosophy based on a simple and proven principle that works for every business every time it's applied. Your four walls, your employees and staff, your customers, your front door, your parking lot, your community connections, and your neighborhood are your first and best opportunities to grow your top-line sales. Neighborhood marketing is a management discipline, a system of running your business with one prime objective, and that is to uniquely and outrageously satisfy the wants and needs of your customers. It's a way of operating that distinguishes you from all your competitors, especially the ones who waste their money on mass media advertising. Television and mass media are no longer your secret weapons for growth and competitive edge. Marketing has changed forever. We know the old stuff isn't working, and we know why. Consumers are too busy to pay attention to advertising. The next time you find yourself mesmerized by yet another sleek auto ad with raindrops that morph into a breathtaking landscape, ask yourself when was the last time you paid attention to the brand being hawked. Advertising in America has become frantic, clever, expensive, and increasingly invisible. The word you hear most often now in ad circles is clutter, followed by recall. The two are inversely proportional. Thanks to cable TV, the internet, and the revelation that an ad can be slapped on just about anything, even a piece of fruit, consumers are besieged by messages that often leave little or no impression. Ours has become a marketing economy, and businesses are scrambling to find ways to stand out from the crowd. Witness the hype surrounding TV spots aired during the Super Bowl. Intense speculation in the media about which ads would be most entertaining give the Super Bowl the air of an advertising World Series. A survey conducted by Insight Express, an online market research service based in Greenwich, Connecticut, found that 1/3 of Super Bowl viewers confessed to having tuned into the big game just for the commercials. Insight Express asked viewers to rank the ads. A few years ago, a spot for a financial services firm which used animation to create the illusion that paralyzed actor Christopher Reeve could walk won the best reviews, and the company appeared the next morning on NBC's Today Show to talk about it. An advertiser's dream come true. But did it persuade you to give that company your money? When Michael Jordan took up the torch for Democratic presidential primary candidate Bill Bradley in 2002, it was news, debated and analyzed by political pundits. But the news ripple helped Bradley more than the ad itself. For the vast majority of businesses, from the largest to the smallest, the task of reaching their audiences has become costly, clumsy, and frustrating. At a recent conference sponsored by the Advertising Research Foundation, analysts reported that recall rates for Internet banner ads had dropped almost to zero as Internet use and content grew. In a holiday survey of 2,677 online shoppers by Active Research, 22% were unable to cite a single Internet ad when asked to name the one they found most memorable. John Wanamaker, the Philadelphia-based department store mogul of the early 1900s, once complained that half the money he spent on advertising was wasted, but he didn't know which half.
You're listening to Limelight America.
Henry Ford never let a wrong turn stop him. His first venture failed miserably, at least for him. He was forced out of his own company by two partners who went on to build another model called Cadillac. 7 years later, a dozen investors put up $2,500 each, and the Ford Motor Company was born. That $2,500 turned into $30 million by 1910. Henry Ford had other failures, including unsuccessful bids for the Senate and the presidency, and then there was the Edsel. But that wasn't his fault. If you have an idea, don't let setbacks or indecision get in your way. Like Yogi Berra once said, when you come to a fork in the road, take it.
Sydney Biddle Barrows is an expert in experience marketing and sales. She is known today for her innovative, unorthodox approach to sales, and perhaps is best known for her reign as the Mayflower Madam when she founded and operated New York's most elite, premium-priced escort service. Sydney Biddle Barrows, coming soon to Limelight America.
When I see a barrier, I cry and I curse, and then I get a ladder and I climb over it. John Johnson.
His name was John Johnson. He was known as the voice of Black America. He rose from poverty to become one of the world's most influential media pioneers by creating the largest black-owned publishing company in the U.S. But more important, through the landmark magazines he founded, Ebony and Jet, Johnson gave African Americans a voice and a face, and, in his words, a new sense of somebodyness, of who they were and what they could do at a time when blacks were virtually invisible in mainstream American culture. Johnson credits much of his success to his mother. Born in Arkansas City, Arkansas, Johnson's father died when he was only 6, forcing everyone in his family to work to survive. I was a working child, he explained to Jim Hoskins, author of Black Stars, African American Entrepreneurs. I learned how to work before I learned how to play, said Johnson. Nevertheless, Johnson's mother realized the importance of education and insisted that he attend school, which he did through the 8th grade. But there was no high school for blacks in Arkansas City. To ensure her son would receive a good education, Johnson's mother toiled as a cook for levee workers until she'd saved enough money so she and John could move to Chicago, which had become a mecca for blacks seeking to escape the poverty and prejudice of the South. Johnson and his mother arrived in Chicago in 1933. It was the middle of the Great Depression, and due to lack of work, they were forced to rely on welfare for 2 years. That experience shamed Johnson and sparked in him a burning desire to succeed. Both my mother and I were determined that we weren't going to stay on welfare, Johnson explained. We always worked toward doing better, toward having a better life. We never had any doubts that we would. Johnson displayed his determination to succeed in high school, graduating with honors in 1936. At a National Urban League dinner to honor Johnson and other students who had distinguished themselves, Johnson met Harry H. Pace, president of Supreme Life Insurance Company of America, which was then the largest black-owned business in the North. Impressed by the young man, Pace asked Johnson about his plans for the future. Johnson explained that he wanted to go to college but could not afford the tuition. Pace offered Johnson a part-time job at Supreme to help him pay for tuition, and this would prove to be a major turning point in Johnson's life. The following September, Johnson enrolled at the University of Chicago and began working at Supreme. He started as an assistant on the Supreme Liberty Guardian, the company's in-house newsletter, and was eventually promoted to editor of the Guardian. One of Johnson's tasks was to comb black newspapers and magazines from around the country and brief Pace on what he learned. But Johnson soon found that his wealth of knowledge put him in the spotlight on the social circuit. African Americans were hungry for news of the black world beyond any connection with crime, which was what the white media usually focused on. This discovery gave Johnson the idea of publishing a magazine for general black audiences. In 1942, he founded Johnson Publishing Company and set out to publish his first magazine, Negro Digest. But when the 24-year-old tried to find a bank that would lend him money, he was waved away by bankers who contemptuously called him boy. Undaunted, Johnson decided to go directly to the public for startup money. Putting up his mother's furniture as collateral, Johnson borrowed $500, which he used to mail out offers to Supreme Life's 20,000 policyholders for discount charter subscriptions. 3,000 people sent in the $2 annual subscription, giving Johnson $6,000 to pursue his dream. To convince a distributor to take on the magazine, Johnson got 30 fellow employees and friends to ask for Negro Digest at newsstands along Chicago's South Side. He also reimbursed friends who bought up most of the copies, convincing dealers the magazine was in demand. He then took those copies and resold them. This ploy was repeated in Detroit, New York, and Philadelphia. Circulation grew slowly at first. Then Johnson began publishing a series of articles titled "If I Were a Negro," in which prominent whites imagined being black. First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt was among those who contributed to the series, which caused a dramatic jump in circulation. Within a year, Negro Digest was selling 50,000 copies a month. Inspired by his success, Johnson started his second magazine, Ebony. That was in 1945. Ebony and Johnson showed that blacks led successful middle-class lives, which played a major role in convincing white corporations to advertise in the black media, as well as persuading advertisers to use black models. Using meticulous market research, Johnson and his staff showed white advertisers that it was in their best interest to reach out to black consumers, and they proved that ads featuring black models had a greater response rate than ads featuring white models. These things are accepted today, but they were new in the 1940s. There were no major black models before Ebony, and there were few black salespeople for major companies before Ebony. Johnson discontinued Negro Digest in 1950. He would revive it 10 years later as Black World, and started an advice magazine called Tan. By 1971, Johnson had changed the title of Tan to Black Stars and expanded its editorial content to include features on black entertainers. The following year, he began publishing it as a pocket-sized weekly under the name Jet. After Jet, Johnson branched out into other projects, including a book division, a book club, and a high-end cosmetics line for blacks. He also purchased 2 radio stations, making him the first African American in Chicago to own a broadcasting outlet. In addition to his own ventures, Johnson is also a major stockholder in Essence, a magazine for black women. In 2002, Johnson began slowing down a bit, handing the company's reins to his daughter, Linda Johnson Rice, who took over as CEO. 3 years later, 87-year-old Johnson, still chairman of the $500 million empire, visited Arkansas City, his childhood home. He toured a museum created by local residents to tell the story of their hometown hero's success. Johnson's story was then told in the media, making headlines around the world when he passed away in August of 2005. Thanks to Johnson's determination and unique vision, he became one of the most successful and wealthy black men in America. Led by its flagship publication, Ebony, with a circulation of 2.1 million, the family-owned Johnson Publishing Company is one of the largest minority-owned businesses and the largest black-owned publishing firm in the world. Looking back on his accomplishments, Johnson said, "There's no secret to success. You have to have a bit of luck and you have to be at the right place at the right time. I was fortunate enough to have a mom who taught me very fundamental things about success. She taught me that you have to earn success, which means you have to prepare yourself. You have to work hard, you have to have commitment, and you have to have faith. You have to believe that things are possible. If there is a secret, the secret is in all of those things."
Ultimately, The PC will be a window to everything people are interested in and everything we need to know. Bill Gates.
Some see him as an innovative visionary who sparked a computer revolution. Others see him as a modern-day robber baron whose predatory practices have stifled competition in the software industry. Regardless of what his supporters and detractors may think, few can argue that Bill Gates is one of, if not the most successful entrepreneur of the 20th century. In just 25 years, he built a two-man operation into a multi-billion-dollar colossus and made himself the richest man in the world somewhere along the way. Yet he accomplished this feat not by inventing new technology, but by taking existing technology, adapting it to a specific market, and then dominating that market through innovative promotion and cunning business savvy. His first exposure to computers came while he was attending the prestigious Lakeside School in Seattle. A local company offered the use of its computers to the school through a teletype link, and young Gates became entranced by the possibilities of the primitive machine. Along with fellow student Paul Allen, he began ditching class to work in the school's computer room. Their work would soon pay off. When Gates was 15, he and Allen went into business together. The two teens netted $20,000 with Trafodata, a program they developed to measure traffic flow in the Seattle area. Despite his love and obvious aptitude for computer programming, and perhaps because of his father's influence, Gates entered Harvard in the fall of 1973. By his own admission, he was there in body but not in spirit, preferring to spend his time playing poker and video games rather than attending class. All that changed in December 1974, when Allen showed Gates a magazine article about the world's first microcomputer. Seeing an opportunity, Gates and Allen called the manufacturer in Albuquerque. They told the president of the company they'd written a version of the popular computer language BASIC for their new computer. When he said he'd like to see it, Gates and Allen, who actually hadn't written anything, started working day and night in Harvard's computer lab. Because they didn't have a microcomputer to work with, they were forced to simulate it on other computers. When Allen flew to Albuquerque to test the program on the 8800, the microcomputer, neither he nor Gates was sure it would run. But run it did. Gates dropped out of Harvard and moved with Allen to Albuquerque, where they officially established Microsoft. The microcomputer company collapsed shortly thereafter, but Gates and Allen were already writing software for other computer startups, including Commodore, Apple, and the Tandy Corporation. The duo moved the company to Seattle in 1979, and that's when Microsoft hit the big time. When Gates learned IBM was having trouble obtaining an operating system for its new PC, he bought an existing operation system from a small Seattle company for $50,000, developed it into MS-DOS, which stands for Microsoft Disk Operating System, and then licensed it to IBM. The genius of the IBM deal, masterminded by Gates, was that while IBM got MS-DOS, Microsoft retained the right to license it to other computer makers. Much as Gates had anticipated, after the first IBM PCs were released, cloners such as Compaq began producing compatible PCs, and the market was soon flooded with clones. Like IBM, rather than produce their own operating systems, the cloners decided it was cheaper to purchase MS-DOS off the shelf. As a result, MS-DOS became the standard operating system for the industry, and Microsoft's sales soared from $7 million in 1980 to $16 million in 1981. Microsoft expanded into application software and continued to grow unchecked until 1984, when Apple introduced the first Macintosh computer. The Macintosh's sleek graphical user interface, the GUI, was far easier to use than MS-DOS, and it threatened to make the Microsoft program obsolete. In response to this threat, Gates announced that Microsoft was developing its own GUI-based operating system called Windows. Gates then took Microsoft public in 1986 to generate capital. The IPO was a roaring success, making Gates one of the wealthiest people in the country overnight. When Windows was finally released in 1985, it wasn't exactly the breakthrough Gates had predicted. Critics claimed it was slow and cumbersome. Apple wasn't exactly pleased either. They saw Windows as a ripoff of the Macintosh operating system, and they sued. The case would drag on until the mid-1990s, when the courts finally decided that Apple's suit had no merit. Meanwhile, Gates worked on improving Windows. Subsequent versions of the program ran faster and froze less frequently. Third-party programmers began developing Windows-based programs, and Microsoft's own applications became hot sellers. By 1993, Windows was selling at a rate of 1 million copies per year. By 1993, Windows was selling at a rate of 1 million copies a month and was estimated to be running on nearly 85% of the world's computers. Microsoft solidified its industry dominance in the mid-1990s by combining Windows with its other applications into suites and persuading leading computer makers to preload their software on every computer they sold. The strategy worked so well that by 2005, Microsoft was posting sales of $39 billion, and Gates's personal wealth had grown to a phenomenal $46.5 billion. Gates has also funneled much of his wealth into his Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which began with an endowment of $28 billion. Since 2000, the world's wealthiest philanthropic institution has pumped $2.3 billion into the American education system, aiming to create smaller and more innovative schools. It's also invested $450 million in global health issues. But with success has come criticism. Microsoft's competitors have complained that the company uses its operating system monopoly to retard the development of new technology, a claim Gates soundly refutes. Nevertheless, the U.S. Justice Department filed an antitrust lawsuit against the company in 1998 over its practice of bundling software with Windows. In November of 1999, a U.S. district court ruled that Microsoft indeed had a monopoly in the market for desktop computer operating systems. The court also found that Microsoft engaged in tactics aimed at snuffing out any innovation that threatened its dominance of the multi-billion-dollar computer industry. Federal mediator was appointed to oversee voluntary settlement talks between the government and the software giant. Before a decision could be made on how to dismantle the monopoly, George W. Bush was elected president. The new administration announced in 2001 that it was no longer seeking to break up Microsoft and would instead seek a lesser antitrust penalty. The final settlement called for Microsoft to share its application programming interfaces with third-party companies and grant full access to its systems, records, and source code to a government-appointed 3-person panel for 5 years. That would ensure compliance. But Microsoft wasn't required to change any of its code or stop tying other software with Windows in the future. Critics saw this as a slap on the wrist. Admirers enjoyed seeing Gates continue to live his charmed life. Attempting to explain his tremendous success, industry experts have pointed out that there are really 2 Bill Gateses. One is a consummate computer geek who can hack code with the best of them. The other is a hard-driven businessman who, unlike most of his fellow Silicon Valley superstars, took readily to commerce and has an innate instinct for the marketplace. The combination enabled Gates to see what his competitors could not see. While they were focusing on selling software, Gates was focusing on setting standards, first with MS-DOS and later with Windows. The standards he helped set shaped the modern computer industry and will continue to influence its growth for a long time to come. An important part of an entrepreneur's spirit is a willingness to help others, even in small ways that, at the time, don't seem like much. One of my favorite quotes comes from Anita Roddick, the founder of a global cosmetics business called The Body Shop Limited. If you think you're too small to have an impact, try going to bed with a mosquito.
Limelight America is produced by the LA Radio Network.